All right. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks where we are continuing to explore the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and getting your questions answered while exploring all sorts of fun stuff. So today's going to be, I haven't quite figured out how to describe what category I would put Betterup in, but we're talking about Betterup, and I have Maya Garza joining me, and so we'll get into that. We'll get into that because I'm curious how you articulate it. But there's a mix of coaching and employee well-being, and we've got a lot of different things going on here. So we'll see how we go through that piece. But before we do, we always like to have a little bit of fun with things. So for those of you who are just joining and tuning in live, why don't you play along, comment in with us, and let's start with this, Maya. So your first question, I'm going to throw a slow pitch to you, is
Okay.
where are you in the world today?
Where am I in the world today? I'm in my office physically, outside
Very
of
literal. I like
Seattle,
that.
very literal, outside
Okay.
of Seattle on the Kitsap Peninsula, if those folks who know the Pacific Northwest
Okay, well,
recognize it.
there's a
Yeah.
fair amount from that region. So what's funny about that is, so okay, so now this is making sense because right before we went live, everybody, just to give some context, because otherwise you'll just be missing it, is you were from Florida, and so you're
hmm
used to the heat. Your
Yeah.
husband's not a fan of the heat and humidity, so you're
Yeah.
in Seattle. So
Yeah.
how did you land there?
Oh, how did I land there? Well, it all started with a very, very determined life goal that I had for
Okay.
myself after I finished grad school. I went to grad school in Ohio. It was very cold those
Okay.
several years that I was there. And I moved to DC.
Okay.
And my goal in life was one, to never leave DC because I loved it, still do.
Okay.
And two, because I was post grad school. So if you imagine late 20s, I said, well, I'm never going to date anyone in the military because that was also something I was doing when I was working. And then I met
Okay.
my husband, who happens to be in the military. So there went that rule.
I like
And of
that.
course, because he's in the military, we moved. And
Ah.
so we have now lived in Charleston, South Carolina. We've had a few stints in Florida. And then we moved to San Diego, which was beautiful. And from San
Okay.
Diego, we moved to the Seattle area.
Okay. Okay. Got it. All right. So
Yeah.
then so it's not that you won't ever go back to where it's hot and humid. It just for right now you're doing a stint in Seattle.
That's right. I do think if I want to take my husband with me, I will probably need to go somewhere that is not year round hot and humid.
Okay. Okay. So you don't mind the seasons. Okay.
No,
All right. All
no.
right.
I just prefer not winter.
Just I love seasons except winter. That
That's
is one
right.
that I do
I
not.
could
Okay.
leave
All
that
right.
one behind.
You could leave that one off. All right, all
Yeah.
right. Which I can, even being in, so I'm in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee area. So winter is definitely
It's a little
a
chilly.
good chunk of
Yeah.
our time. In fact, it's
hmm
just wrapping up now. So, we've adjusted to it. All right. Well, so let's shift gears. Well, we're not shifting gears quite yet because we have the icebreaker question
Okay.
that we have for you too. So you're in Seattle. And again, if you're watching, you can play along with this as well. But Maya, where would you build your dream home?
Ah, see, this is like I imagine that my husband and I will need marital therapy at some point over this question alone,
We're
because it's
working it
been.
out here. So when the
That's right.
time
I'm
comes, you can
getting
just
some
say, go watch
practice. I'm
Learning
getting
Tech
some
Talks. Yeah, there
practice.
you go.
That's
There you
right.
go.
That's
You can
right. So
express this.
for probably close to 10 years, we have been talking about this. Like,
Okay.
where would we either retire? He will retire before I retire, as he likes to point out. And
Okay.
I would love to be somewhere by a beach.
Okay.
It preferably, if it were not humid, by the beach. I would love for it to be within walking distance of a town that has restaurants and
Okay.
shops.
Okay.
Something maybe like within driving distance, you could be more in like forest area, so some mountains. I
Okay.
haven't quite found that spot exactly,
All right.
but that's where it would be. My husband would be on a farm with chickens and land.
Farm with
And so he
chickens.
might need wife number two for that one, but
Okay.
maybe we'll see.
Okay.
We could
Got it.
vacation there.
I
Yeah.
like your criteria. Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. So for me, mine, I actually can perfectly picture this. I don't know. It's similar to you. If this day ever comes, my wife and I will probably need a mediator in between us because I don't know if she'd be 100% on board with this. But so for mine, I can already picture it. It'd be in the
Mm.
mountains. So I was born in Colorado and spent my
Oh.
younger years there and
hmm
loved the mountains. And
hmm
so for me, it'd be up in the mountains on a lake. There
Oh,
has to be a
yeah.
lake
The lake.
with some, yep, there's got to be a
It
lake. There's
doesn't.
got to be a mountain lake up there. Yep, lots
Hmm.
of space. Log cabin. See, I'm very particular. It's got to be a big log cabin. That's it. I have a lot of kids, so there's got to be plenty of room
Yeah.
for them to run around. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
My kids
All
call
right.
those
Well,
the Lincoln log cabins because, yes,
I would if it was made of Lincoln logs, that would be
that would
fine
be
with me. I
perfect.
don't care
Yes.
as long as they're big Lincoln
Big
logs. There'll be a
ones.
lot of
Yep.
Lincoln. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's got to be
Yeah.
big. Okay. All right. Well, so let's shift gears. Let's shift gears
Okay.
over to Betterup and let's talk about that a little bit because going back to this, so before we get into it though, because I'm really curious to see how you articulate or how you describe it. But before we do, let's get to know you a little bit more because we talked about this briefly as we got started,
Hmm.
but let's unpack this even more. So, your background is in IO psychology. So, I'm guessing being in ed tech was not something that as a child you said, you know what, someday I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be in an ed tech company.
No, definitely not. I think I was thinking I would work with elephants, or I wanted to be a
Elephants.
teacher. Elephants, yeah. I don't know. I have a thing for elephants. So
Okay.
it was either elephants or a teacher. But I was really one of those odd ducks that really early on I kind of like honed in on psychology as something
Okay.
that just fascinated me. I was always extroverted. I loved being around people, and that's kind of how I associated how you work with people is through psychology. I don't know why or how that really started, but that's kind of what it was. And when I was in high school, I realized that I didn't want to do what was traditional psychology in my mind, which is
Okay.
therapy or clinical work. I loved the world of work. Just I loved work, and I kind of stumbled upon industrial organizational psychology in high school, and it was that was it. That was it from then on. And what
Okay.
fascinated me most is how we make decisions around the work that we do, and how we help people get into the jobs that they have. And so I specialized in selection, so pre employment selection
Okay.
testing and judgments and decision making that goes around that whole process. And it was fascinating to me. But why that matters is because in the field of IO psychology, like there's the I and the O, and
Yeah.
most people
Yeah.
don't know. It's like the big name that's like, what does it really mean?
It's a
And
term
the,
that's thrown around. I think people have
so
heard
right,
it, but they may
and
not necessarily know what that
exactly,
is.
exactly. But there's so much history and depth to that, and it connects a lot to Betterup today too, because the I part of psychology, that's the selection, that's the judgment decision making, is the hard science part
Okay.
of IO. Whereas the O part is the organizational stuff. That's the leadership development. That's the employee training. That's the coaching, and that
Got
was
it.
considered softer. It's almost like you could see the parallel between soft skills and hard skills for a long time. Like soft skills just didn't get the recognition that they needed on like how important this is. And I
Yeah.
think in the space of IO, it's because there wasn't enough research. There wasn't enough data. There wasn't enough evidence to say this is how it works. And here's how we can apply really rigorous processes. And so when I started working, it was in the space of selection. And then I kind of stumbled upon a project in leadership and development, and I fell in love. And that's where I saw, oh my, if I think about what truly brings people in organizations satisfaction and joy and growth and engagement, it was all the stuff that happened after they were hired, right? There's a lot of
Got
like
it.
not a lot of joy that happens after people are hired as well. If
No.
the work,
Right.
right?
We
If the
invest a lot.
organization
We
does
invest a lot on the front
exactly,
end getting them in,
right?
and then a lot of times they get there and it's just left at,
It's
oh, okay.
blah, exactly. And so I fell in love with the leadership and development space, and I got into coaching, which was the dark horse of IO. Like you, like that wasn't the stuff that you did if you were a real scientist, right?
Got it.
And so I started going deeper
So
and
I have
deeper
to
into
ask you
that
that
space.
part.
Go for it.
I actually have to
Okay.
ask you as a follow-up on this. So you said that was like the dark horse of that section. So I am
Mm-hmm.
curious, do you think that's contributed to why there's not as much research behind it because it's perceived as more the squishier thing, so people have focused on the more tangible side?
Mm-hmm. Two things. Yes, and it's almost like the chicken and the egg syndrome
Okay.
here, right? Because if you think about traditional coaching, it's been reserved for the upper echelons. It's
It
the
has.
C-suite, the executives, right? So you've got one or two people in an organization that are getting coaching, or you have coaches who are over the course of years only working with a couple of people, and they're not rigorously collecting data. There's not enough of a
No.
mass to understand,
Okay.
right?
That
And
makes
so
sense. Yeah, because you need a
which
fair
one's
amount of
driving?
data to actually be able to come up with something.
Exactly.
And it's such a
Exactly.
small, okay. That makes
Yeah.
sense. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it was great. Great.
Okay. All right. So that makes sense how then this got you into the space. But now let's talk about Betterup a little bit because again, as
Hmm.
I was even thinking, how do I describe it? I mean, it's gotten a lot of attention recently. So when people
Hmm.
say you work for Betterup,
Yeah.
what is that? How do you describe it?
Oh, wow. So many ways. But so I'd start one with kind of our mission. So BetterUp's mission, since 2013, when it was founded, has really been to help people everywhere live their
Okay.
lives with greater clarity, purpose, and passion. And there are various avenues to that. Now, our avenue is through a mobile-based platform for professional and personal growth and development. So we
Okay.
partner with companies and we offer their employees coaches for leadership development. We offer them coaches and support if they are new parents, if they are going through massive transitions in their work and in their personal life, if they want help with their sleep and their nutrition to bring their best selves to work. So we partner with organizations and we provide dedicated one-on-one care, curated content, coaching, and more really in the pocket of employees. So you have that access and you have that help precisely for the things that you need in the moment that you need it.
Okay. Got it. So, well, and I think one of the things that's interesting because it can be easy to just say, oh, coaching. So it's coaching. But some of the things you hit on there is a little bit different in that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times when we think about coaching at work, and I think this gets back to the well-being side of things, that when I think of
Mm-hmm.
Better Up, that's one of the areas that I think about
Yeah.
is the fact that when you think about this, a lot of times people's association with coaching is very specific to their job role. You know,
Yeah.
I'm coaching you on how to be a better leader or how to be more
Yeah.
successful in your role. And some of the examples you just gave there are very not necessarily seen as role specific if you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
nutrition or health, things like that. So how I have to imagine that sometimes is met with a little bit of a sideways like why. So I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
how has that approach impacted the space that you've played in?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I'll come back to the story of like why that actually
Okay.
like hits a really important point. So, like our vision from the beginning was really for Better Up to be this gym for personal growth and development. So, an
Okay.
experience kind of just packed with personalized care, interactive, evidence-based kind of digital exercises and programs, even community engagement that is truly designed to inspire, to educate, to provide like insightful feedback loops for individuals to help them track progress and optimize their growth, like all in one place. Because the reality is, I think as many of us, and I saw when your little girl read by, like our
Yeah,
our personal and our professional, they don't live in different pockets in
they do not.
ourselves. You don't turn one off when you walk into the office and just expect it to live there. It's not like my son who has says he has three stomachs and he can separate them, one for dessert, one for dinner, one for snacks. It just doesn't work that way, right? And
Yeah.
so what it made me think of, Christopher, is with that question is like it's funny you ask it because it's part of our even interview process is so I work with a team of behavioral scientists, solution consultants, and we translate the science of behavior change, of
Okay.
evidence-based processes to help people grow and develop. And one of the questions that we're often asking people is like, help us connect the dots. Like we know the answers to this, but we want to hear
Okay.
other people articulate it between, well-being and performance at work because they're so tightly intertwined. I mean, just take yourself for an example, and I can use myself as an example. I have three
Yeah.
kiddos, one of whom is 20 months old, and he likes to wake up at 2:30 in the morning sometimes. And last night was one of those times. So if you end up being not rested, if you are dissatisfied with what's going on in your life, if you are struggling, like gosh, through the
Yep.
pandemic, if you have kids at home that you're not just the host of a show like this and have your daytime job, but you're also now teacher and gym
Yes.
teacher
Right.
and cafeteria worker and all of those things. Your overall performance is going to suffer because your attention is in so many different places, and maybe you're stressed, and maybe you're exhausted, and your performance at work is going to suffer, and maybe your organization really needs you to step up and innovate and take on more responsibility, which is, by the way, something that we found happened quite a bit when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
You can't be at your best if you're not really looking at all of those aspects of your life. And when you have support in those places, when you get tips on how to have better sleeping habits, right? When you get support through how to manage that stress at work and at home, it helps you show up better at work and you perform better at work.
It's funny that you talk about this because this is one of those things that I feel like you hear this and logically you go, oh, that makes sense. But a lot of times it's not always immediately translated back into the workplace, and organizations are not always thinking about it this way. I think 2020 in many regards forced this dialogue. It forced this dialogue, but it wasn't new to 2020. It's not like people struggled with this before. And in fact, I think a lot of times, just even in my own leadership with my teams, you knew when something was off outside of work in someone's performance. If you were paying attention, you knew like something's not right. And I remember when I had team members who suddenly were going through a divorce or they just were having a kid, their first child, and you could just see it. And if you don't help address that, it does have a tangible workplace thing. So you can pretend, well, that's not really my business as an organization. But the reality is, yes, it is, because you're dealing with people. This isn't a machine.
Right. Exactly. And the really important aspect of that too is not only do you want to help the individuals in going through those situations, you want to provide them support. So like one of the most used we have verticals within our solution is new parent coaching, and then also working through uncertainty and change, all the uncertainty and change that was coming, through COVID-19. And huge uptake in that, right? But it's really important.
I have to imagine.
Right. Amazing for managers of people going through those, right? Is how do you recognize, how do you support, how do you adapt your style and help them find the right solutions as well? Because as some managers are enlightened and understand their role within that and how they can support others, but not everyone is. And I think COVID-19, what it did do, it didn't make this like new science. I think it was.
It's not like the science suddenly changed. And we went, wow, people have dramatically changed.
Yeah, I think it really allowed people to go, I get it now, right? Because if you are now that leader who didn't before quite get it, but now, and I've had this happen, I kid you not, Christopher, is I'm like on a video call like this with an executive at a Fortune 500 organization, and their naked child just streaks behind them, right? And you can, like, very early on, like, embarrassment would go over their face. And I'm so sorry. I'm like, listen, we are all living this. We are all in the same boat together. So I think it was a great equalizer, and it opened our eyes a little bit more, right? Because I liked, you might have heard this. I can show you all the data in the world. I can show you the research studies and the figures and the charts about why looking at the whole person, why looking at those critical well-being aspects is important and helping people do that. I can show you all the data. But if you think about, like, your kids are a great example. When they go to bed, do they say, Dad, show me some data and facts? Or do they go, tell me a story?
Right.
Right. And so I think this created that live story for people a little bit. And you can pull in their personal experience and go, the research studies are there, but like just think about like yourself for a moment and everyone around you.
Well, and your point about it being a great equalizer has, I think that's where it's just given bigger exposure to it. Now, I was dealing with this before COVID hit. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
going back to that point of the first time it
Yeah.
happens, you're like, oh, this is really awkward and uncomfortable. And then over time you get more comfortable with it. But, because I think back to, so funny story, and then I'll share kind of an insight with I remember I won't mention which company I was with, but I was on a very large call,
Mm-hmm.
leading this call, and one of my children came in and shouted at the top of her voice that she had to go poop right now. And I remember for me, I was just so used to it because this was pre 2020. I was just so used to it.
Mm-hmm.
I just handed the mic off to somebody else, turned off my camera, and said, I'll be back in a minute, like it was no big deal. And I remember in
Mm-hmm.
that moment, people just went, did that just, and to me, it was just, what? I
Yeah.
have something that's going on type of a thing. But I think in 2020, one of the things is you really gain greater empathy towards that
Mm-hmm.
because it was one of these things where even if that wasn't your situation,
Mm-hmm.
you were forced to see that that
Yeah.
is the situation
Yep.
of your
Mm-hmm.
employees. You got to see a little bit into the window of, oh, their life is bigger than just what they bring to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that you can value all of those aspects. And,
Right.
maybe on the topic of parenting, because this is just kind of interesting, or at least it's interesting to me, maybe interesting to others. We actually ran a study right at the beginning of 2020, not 20, of the pandemic. And one of the things we looked at, we had thousands of individuals in this study, and we looked at like what changed for them, how they were feeling, how their sleep was doing, how they were feeling optimism wise, and we also asked like what were your biggest stressors right now.
Okay.
And this was fascinating. And we then compared two groups of people because as people ourselves, we were seeing this within our company. So we wanted to look at it. And we compared people with kids at home and people without kids at home. And what we found, not shockingly, is that people who have kids at home, their number one stressor by far, I mean, it's like if I ever showed you the chart, it would be like hilarious. Their number one stressor was their children at home.
Okay.
If you looked at people without kids at home, it looked very different. It was their customers, actually technology, their boss who was like now pinging them all the time. And you're like, wow, like people with kids, like they are struggling. But here's where it got really interesting. When we looked at their actual average level of stress of the people with kids at home and the people without kids at home, their
Yeah.
level of stress was the same.
Okay.
So biggest stressor versus their actual level
That
of stress.
changed.
That changed. And so they were like, oh, something's going on here. Because you would think that the people with kids at home would actually be significantly more stressed, right?
But
And
they
the
weren't.
reality is they weren't. And so what we did is we looked at the drivers of the stress and the moderators of the stress. So what was actually happening under the surface? And what we found is that the people with kids at home actually had higher levels of resilience than the people without kids at home. They had higher levels of emotional regulation. They had stronger connections and a positive association with their organization, feeling like they were getting support from their organization. And they were still experiencing more, I'll just simplify and say like outdoor getting out time.
Okay.
And that kind of leads you to think like, wow, like one, parents have lots of coping strategies because we've learned how to deal with the crazy, right? And that has built up
Yeah.
our resilience. But like the organizational support was really huge. And then in organizations where they felt like they were having the support, that was really helping them quite a bit. And so like that organizational experience that people went through during this time was really critical.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Well, and so that leads me to my next question on this, and I do want to get into. I want to make sure we unpack kind of how this really works. Um, what's funny is on the parenting topic, Scott Mesh commented, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," and
That's right.
I suppose there's probably some truth to that one. But so on this, because I think for some leaders and for some organizations, this was a difficult reality to accept in some regards.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think it's a positive thing that we've been pushed into this, because what I've seen over the years is people were forced to compartmentalize, which
Mm-hmm.
actually added another layer of stress,
Mm-hmm.
because now you were trying to balance this but not show it. And so you were masking it. And this created just way more,
Yeah.
again, I spent some time in psychology as well. Like, this adds a layer of burden to
Yes.
people that can be very traumatic. So I
Mm-hmm.
think from that standpoint, this opening the door to that was a positive, but not always met with, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. I see doing this is a good thing. So I'm curious, as you've treaded into this space,
Mm-hmm.
as you've tried to move forward, how have you helped organizations make that shift? Because going to that point of, you can show the data, which it's good
Mm-hmm.
there's data there, because it's one thing to say, hey, we think this is better,
Mm-hmm.
having the data to back it. But I have to imagine at some points that's been met with resistance of,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's not really our
Yeah.
responsibility, or, I'm not. How have you helped organizations work through that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question because sometimes we walk into organizations and they kind of like they come at this with open arms and give it a big hug because it's part of their culture as well, and it's part of their evolution and maturity, and others not as much. So if I think about and this kind of goes back to the ethos of Better Up and what our I think differentiation is in this space because. Going back to like 2013 and even today, like we're the inventors of coaching and care at scale. And I think that at scale really matters to answer that
Okay.
question here because we tap into rigorous behavioral science. That's essential to what we do. Um, we use unique data and AI to not only create these kind of hyper personalized experiences, but then to foster human connection and actual employee engagement. That bit also
Okay.
matters quite a bit, right?
Okay.
So this provides then unparalleled insights and outcomes for organizations. So in this case, it does come back to the combination of the data and the stories. So when we're working with organizations and often either coaching or providing access to our platform or personal development to thousands of people within one organization, it's really hard to dispute when there are actual changes within the organization.
Okay.
Right. And so one of the things that we do, and it's a core part of kind of our philosophy, is we measure along the way. And this has been a problem with coaching historically, is this inability to measure, but we measure along the way each individual's journey. But then that gets aggregated up to the company level or like even the department level or regional level for organizations. And we can connect that to their business outcomes. Right.
Okay.
And then we can track for the organization what impact it's having. Yeah.
Got it.
Of course,
Okay.
nothing is as powerful as when they actually hear some stories from their own employees or they go through that life-changing experience themselves.
Okay. So there's two pieces I want to go that, and I told you, we're just going to kind of go down
Go
different
for it.
paths based on where we go. One of the things that I'm really curious about that you brought up, you talk about the personalization behind this. And I think
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to coaching, this is a, and this is why I want to unpack it a little bit, is that, as you know probably from your psychology background, a lot of times people don't even really even quite know what they need. They're not
Yeah.
quite sure. They maybe have some insights or maybe some feelings, but they don't really know. And so the risk is they might say, well, I need help with this. And really that's not what they need help with. They
Mm-hmm.
actually need help with this. So when you're talking about this personalization piece, how is BetterUp helping people
Mm-hmm.
get that coaching and development on the right things? Because you have the risk of saying, well, you're getting all the help, but you're doing it on the wrong in the wrong places.
Yeah, I think that this is a great question. And it's actually, it comes from a couple of different places. So one of them is what the part of our process when people kind of onboard into the platform and the whole Better Up experience is they go through an onboarding assessment. And that
Okay.
onboarding assessment looks at, it assesses our whole person model. So mindsets and behaviors that are really important for your success at work and outside of work. So things like your growth mindset, your self-awareness,
Okay.
And then in the behavior space, like things like your physical thriving, your social thriving, your emotional thriving, cognitive thriving, as well as really specific kind of behaviors around what it takes to inspire as a leader at work. So how are you motivating others, guiding others, including others? And so we measured those things. And then we also ask about, and I won't tell you everything because it's a proprietary algorithm, but and this is where some of the AI comes in to make it happen for thousands of people, right, at scale, is we'll ask about things that are going on in your work life. What are the transitions that you're going through and the experiences that you've had? And we do ask, what do you think you want to work on? And sometimes people have clarity around that, and sometimes they don't. Some people
have some clarity. Sometimes they don't.
Exactly. And sometimes that, like you said, the clarity they have isn't quite what your organization might think that you need, right? So there might be a disconnect there. So you have that, your own input. Then you have the opportunity to ask your manager, like, hey, what do you think I should work on? That gets pulled in. And then you meet with a coach and they help you unpackage that very early on and hone in on your goals. And then, a little bit further in the process, you even have the opportunity to do a 360. Get some additional input. And again, you have the manager who can help guide you in unpackaging that, the coach who helps guide you in unpackaging that for you, making your personal development plan. And then there's also the goals of the organization, right? So oftentimes, we are helping organizations.
You're taking a bunch of different
data, right? And you're inputting, yes. And to the individual, it kind of seems like, you know what? I just kind of have this personal guide, right? Sometimes it's their one-on-one coach, or it's maybe their group coach, or maybe it's the magic, what might seem like the magic, but is really the science of the platform making suggestions of what they should digest or look into. And the person going, oh, wow, you kind of hit it on the head. That's exactly what I need right now.
I didn't have words.
I didn't have words for it, but now I do. And you can dig in. So it is like this triangulation of data and information that gets inputted. And then the individual gets the right support in the right moment, exactly when they need it.
Okay. Well, and that also helps explain. So first of all, I think that onboarding piece really helps unpack why that matters, because this goes back to this is an important piece, and different people have different levels of clarity. There's a lot of different data points. And so pulling all that together is going to be a critical factor to get it right. But it also helps explain, because the term AI gets thrown around a lot in our industry. Oh yeah, we have AI. And it's not always really clear as to for what or for why. But the description you gave helps give some color to that, because realistically, there's a lot of data that's coming in from that.
That's right.
And then now you're comparing it. And I have to imagine part of what that AI is doing is also assessing all these other pieces of data points. So you can start to find patterns where, hey, if this person has this set of data, this is kind of some things that they need to help better match this. And that's something that, I guess humans could go through, but the sheer volume and time it would take would be impossible. So what AI is doing then is really speeding up, looking for those patterns and making this really truly personalized versus just, hey, what do you want? Well, I don't necessarily know. And you may not have enough data on me to really help make a recommendation, or just because I did this one thing, recommending something else may not work.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. And one of the other ways that's really tangible, and I think people who are in the coaching industry would really appreciate this, because, traditionally, if you think about, again, I'll go back to executive coaching, because that's like what many people, when they think about positively of coaching, think about that. Like, you go through this kind of laborious process of matching individuals to coaches, and sometimes you interview each other, and gosh, that's a lot of lift and effort to do that. And so we use data to help us get almost there, right? And if we think about our network of coaches, we have thousands of coaches, over 2,000 coaches, and we're working with hundreds of thousands of individuals. You can't have conversations with each and every one of them. So we actually use our AI technology to match people to the right coaches for them. And we have a 97% success rate in doing that on the first time.
Pretty good.
Right. Yeah. And so, but we still because the individual is still so important in that process. So we're not going to go say, Christopher, John is the right coach for you. We're going to say, Christopher, we've identified 3 coaches that we think will be the right fit for you. Maybe it's John.
Which one do you
It's,
think?
yeah. And then you get to still have that choice because that matters a lot as well.
It does. It's actually, I'm trying to think what study I was reading the other day about this that was talking about it was being used in, I don't remember if it was selection or something else, but it was talking about how when they threw AI at it and just had AI made the decision,
Mm-hmm.
even though the AI was actually doing a pretty good
Yeah.
job, the skepticism and the change
Yep.
management and all the stuff behind
Mm-hmm.
it actually was terrible and it was a
Yeah.
mess. And all they did was add one step in the process
Yeah.
where the AI said, hey, here's a choice. And
Exactly.
actually, they got better results than the AI could by itself just from a selection standpoint because that human critical component was still there,
Mm-hmm.
and the adoption and acceptance
Yeah.
from people was there because they said,
Exactly.
well, I still have a say in this. I still have a
Mm-hmm.
role. You're not
Yeah.
taking it away, but you're augmenting that process with technology. So I don't have to interview 2,000 people because that sounds
Exactly.
terrible. I don't want
Exactly.
to do that.
I don't
I
want to do
want
that.
3 that have been pretty much matched to me, and then I can kind of
Mm-hmm.
use my best
Yep.
judgment.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay. So then the next one goes back to this measurement piece that you talked
Mm-hmm.
about in terms of helping organizations with this. Because I'm sure there has to be, like we talked about, with some organizations, there still has to be a little bit of skepticism on, oh, this is, this may be a little bit of uncomfortable territory for us, but you're connecting it and saying, let us show you from an impact standpoint, because this will. We can show you that this is going to make a difference. How then are you working with organizations on that piece? Because I have to imagine there's probably some things that can be relatively universal where you can say, we can
Mm-hmm.
come in and we think we can affect these metrics and these metrics. But then there also has to be a degree of personalization that has to happen there with an organization to help them see what's most important to you.
100%. That's exactly right. So we measure, so using our whole person model, which has 20
Okay.
plus different dimensions, things like I mentioned around including others, guiding others, and there's multiple behaviors that kind of fall under that. And so we measure all of those things, plus we measure outcomes like productivity and engagement and satisfaction. We measure that on our end, so we can show kind of before and after and growth. And we also connect to the organization's data, right?
Okay.
So organizations often will do engagement surveys. You have productivity measures. Like we just recently, I think we shared this just the other day, we did an outcome study with an organization with their sales professionals where we improved their sales pipeline by 20%, right? And sales attainment goals. So those are big deals, big
Those are
numbers,
big quantitative
big
metrics.
numbers. Like
Yeah.
we were in the millions of like actual hard dollars that impacted their sales team from
Okay.
having access to coaching, right? So you can connect then what we measure through the specific individual behaviors that are changing, right? So when people's stress is improved, when resilience improved, when their ability to give feedback and their ability to align their team and recognize individuals improves, what are the improvements then that occur at the organizational level? And so when we look at those things plus the organizational outcomes, that's where you can really start to see the impact. I mean, I'll even tell you, we did this specifically with resilience just to show the
Okay.
impact of like this kind of uber capability. It's an outcome, by the way. Like some people think that you can turn resilience on and off. It's not. Like you have to build the capability to be
Yeah.
resilient. So when we show that organizations, we could only obviously do this for publicly traded organizations, but we went back at our organizations that we were working with that were publicly traded, where we could get their year over year growth. And we
Okay.
actually found that organizations that grew in resilience that we were working with there had an increase by, I think, like 4 times over
Wow.
year growth. It was
Okay.
crazy. It
Huh.
might be 40% increase. I'm getting my fours confused, but it was huge and I can send that to you. But I mean,
Okay.
like numbers like that are pretty hard to argue because kind of going back to our earlier point, like people might think that rest doesn't matter or stress doesn't matter or physical
Just
or
muscle
emotional thriving
through it.
doesn't
Just, it's
matter.
fine.
Exactly. But it actually
It
translates and
does.
we can show that path. It goes from that kind of personal thriving component to how you show up as a leader, how you can give feedback, how you engage with others, how you motivate. Like, so it builds those critical skills, and that translates into hard numbers for your team's performance. And in fact, there's a trickle effect from managers who improve, their teams actually do better. And so we've compared teams of individuals who are getting coached to teams of individuals not getting coached, and they perform better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's interesting about this, and from a data standpoint, I think this is where, somebody asked me recently, what's one of the things that I'm most looking forward to coming out of 2020? And I said, I'm fascinated to see all the data that starts coming out about some of this stuff, because I think there's been historically just a little bit, and I just even think of conversations I've been in where it's been like, well, I didn't, I had to deal with this type of stuff. And it's like, well, but what if you hadn't? Think how much better you could have been. And isn't that really the goal? Not, well, I want to, see people just kind of muscle through it or grit their teeth and survive. It's like, well, yeah, but that's not how you get a thriving organization. That's how you might get one that's making it. You might be successful, but are you reaching your full potential and success?
Yep.
And without the data, it can be hard to make that sell to somebody who may be having a hard time making that shift in their head.
Well, it's huge too. And so we recently did some work and we did some research on the concept of languishing. And so like, I think I shared a chart that you can show, but this is kind of cool in that
I'll bring it in.
It's really crazy if you think about the majority of the population today is what we would call languishing. And languishing is like the sense of stagnation and emptiness. It's like if you ever walked around and you're like, I kind of feel blah or meh, right?
I'm kind of here, but I'm not.
Right, exactly. And this is such an important concept because in psychology, we think about mental health on a spectrum from depression to flourishing or thriving, really, right? And flourishing or thriving is really this peak of well-being. So you have a really strong sense of meaning. You feel like you can master things and things matter and that you matter. Whereas like the complete opposite of that, like on the other end, is like clinical depression in a way, right? And I think a lot of people think that if you are, in this languishing space, and it's unfortunate, 55% of us are languishing.
That's a big percentage.
That's a big percent. And this is why this matters to organizations. This doesn't mean that you are clinically depressed. You're not. You're just blah. But that
you're just making it through the day.
You're making it through the day.
You're making it through the day.
Exactly. But what is going on here, and I think again, like pandemic times shed a light on this, but it doesn't mean that it just happened to people because of the pandemic. It just became so much crisper and clearer. We just had
much greater awareness into it.
Exactly. But what we found is when we looked at all of our thousands of members and we looked at this data, that when we move the needle for folks and through about 6 months of coaching, you can really move the needle for folks from this languishing space to one where people are going into a steady state and then also going into like this strong super functional state. So like you're moving people into thriving and then super functional, that there are huge impacts at work. So when you move people from this kind of stuck languishing, they're 5 times more likely to then be rated as high performers at work. They're twice as likely to get a salary increase.
Wow.
And this is huge. 9 times more likely, like the people that we moved over, are then 9 times more likely to get a promotion. 20 this one's number 20 times higher levels of productivity. So this goes back to the question of why should an organization 20x productivity
if you
from
can
someone
move
who's
5
blah.
or 10% of these languishing people into the thriving, you're talking 20x of a return on that.
Exactly. That's the ROI.
Okay.
That's the hard numbers. This is why it matters.
Well, and I think that's where this topic has, and this is where the data piece is so critical to it, is that historically, I think this has been, and you mentioned this very early on when you talked about the coaching, the leadership development
Hmm.
in the IO psychology, it's been perceived as squishy.
Hmm.
Well, it's kind of the squishy thing. We kind of maybe think it has an impact, but we aren't really sure. We can't really quantify it. And now as the data starts pouring out, we're starting to see this isn't just like marginally better. Making these
Hmm.
types of investment in your workforce, it's not a marginal nudge in
No.
performance. We're talking exponential performance
Hmm.
nudges, types of things. So this is, yes, and I think in the past, sometimes it's been perceived of, well, doing this is in conflict with organizational
No.
performance. And instead no, it's quite the opposite. It's a
Yeah,
yes and. You make these
exactly.
investments and you see huge performance returns.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think if you think about what's going on with our society today, so it's not just about well-being, like think about the social unrest that we're going through. Like, this week particularly is pretty important
Yeah.
for us as a country. And no matter where you fall on that spectrum, like one of the things that is so essential for organizations today is to really focus on DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging,
Yep.
and being inclusive leaders and inclusive individuals at work and how important that is. And I hope I never have to go into organizations and make the case for why being an inclusive leader matters, but sometimes we do. And I think
It still happens.
it still happens. And I think it's because sometimes we have, because it's hard. Like, let's be real, it is hard. It is there. We have deeply seated unconscious biases that we don't even understand sometimes, but it's so important for us as a species and as a society to be thinking about these things, but then to be showing up at work and in our life as inclusive individuals, building that belonging and that inclusion for others. But at the end of the day, that it also has like dollar impacts for
Yeah.
organizations. Like if you're right now thinking about how am I going to transform my organizational culture from the way it is today to the way I need it to be post pandemic, how am I going to transform my business model because my business no longer makes sense in today's world?
Right.
I need people to innovate. I need people to be those engaged individuals and to be
And
thinking
they need to be
differently.
resilient so that they
And they
can
need to be
handle and
resilient.
be able to handle the change.
Exactly, exactly. If you don't have a culture of inclusion and belonging, you are
You're not going to survive
hamstringing.
it.
No, not at all, because those behaviors, those concepts are intrinsically linked for individuals, right? But we see when you have managers who are more inclusive and they create cultures of inclusion and belonging for their team members, well, gosh, then you have massive ripple effects within the organization. And that's where you see the really big impact into team engagement going up, lower turnover for
Yep.
organizations. You have organizational support numbers, and you're the kind of the NPS, like the net
Yep.
promoter score that employees give their organizations goes up. And those things translate, right? Team innovation improves. And that matters today more than ever.
Yeah. Well, and I've worked with a number of organizations where I think a lot of times they just haven't necessarily been tracking the data
Mm-hmm.
and making the correlations, but any of them that I've ever talked to or worked with that have, they've never come back and said, you know what, I just haven't seen, it just didn't really do anything for us. I
Mm-hmm.
don't really know why we did it. Every single time, universally, it has been similar to the data you showed, which is it's exponential. It's
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah.
marginal improvements.
Mm-hmm.
So that leads me to the next piece, which is, I think one of the things that you brought it up earlier in the show, that this kind of coaching or just coaching in general has often been,
Mm-hmm.
here we're talking about inclusion, has been very exclusive. It's been a
Mm-hmm.
very exclusive resource to a
Yeah.
majority of the organization where we've
Right.
said, well, yeah, we do coaching, yeah, we do development, but we only do it for our top 1%
Yeah.
of the organization because historically it's been extremely expensive. It's been
Mm-hmm.
something that going back to your other point, we couldn't really quantify the investment. So if we're going to pour money into it and we don't really know if it's going to do anything, we're probably not going to pour this across the enterprise. So
Hmm.
how then is Betterup? What steps are you doing to
Hmm.
help make it more
Yeah.
democratized to the workforce? Because clearly, based on the data you've shown, there's value to
Yeah.
doing it, but then
Yeah.
it's about, well, how do you make this scalable?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what comes back to our mission, and to allow every individual to live their life with clarity, purpose, and passion. But at an organizational level, it's been like we said, to democratize coaching. And we believe that every employee, no matter the level, could benefit from professional coaching. And so our programs and our solutions are individually crafted for every partner, and their specific needs. And by partner, I mean our organizations. And we work with a variety of customers, creating kind of that specially designed program for the employees, at every level of their organization. And so it can be, organizations as diverse as, because we work with every industry, social
Yeah.
media, technology, kind of your traditional, large box stores, like whatever it is, we likely work with them, and across levels. Because the reality is, when you're thinking about changing the way an organization functions, whether, you're thinking about changing your organizational culture because you need a shift to a new way of
Yep.
being, or you're rolling out a new culture around performance management. You want ongoing feedback and coaching to be part of your organization. You need everyone to be speaking with
Okay.
each other. You're going through a merger and acquisition. Like, that's hard, right? Imagine bringing two
It is.
organizations together, and what happens if people
A
get let
clash of
go, and then
cultures a
the
lot of
clash of
times, and you've
cultures.
got, yeah,
Um,
there's a lot.
right. Digitization, like all of that is happening. And so it's not just people at the top who need support, and you can't roll out an e-learning or even some training workshops to make those
No.
really hard shifts happen. So when you're looking to really change behavior at an organization, when you're looking to shift the way an organization does business, right? Um, you need the majority of individuals to be part of that process, and you
Okay.
need them to have the skills to be able to go through the change themselves. So we do a lot of work around leading change, and managing through change. You need those skills across multiple levels. And that's why we work from individual contributors all the way up through executives.
Okay. Got it. Well, and one of the things you brought up when you talk about that I think is important for practitioners in the L&D space is that sometimes we get kicked in the nose a little bit on this
Mm-hmm.
because we aren't telling that story you just told, and we're actually
Mm-hmm.
not elevating this kind of
Yeah.
effort to an enterprise strategy level. It's more of perceived as a one-off, well, we want to
Yep.
do this for some learning stuff. No, this isn't a
Yeah.
learning thing. This is an enterprise culture, strategy, transformation thing. This is a core component to what we're trying to achieve as a
Yeah.
business. And that's in the messaging. That's a big part
Yep.
of the messaging that I think L&D leaders can think about as they're going back, rather than this feeling like, oh, here's another thing that the L&D team wants to go do for the
Mm-hmm.
organization. No, this is something that
Yeah.
we as an organization have to do to achieve the goals we're trying to accomplish with the work we're
Yeah.
doing.
I couldn't have said it better. You're 100% right. I think if anything is ever labeled truly as just a program for this group of people, it's not important enough for the organization.
No.
It has
Oh,
to
we don't have
matter.
funding for that, or
Yeah.
this and that.
Yeah.
It's different.
But when was the last time a CEO said, "We're not going to go through that digital transformation," or, "This merger and acquisition, that's only going to impact this handful of people. They're going
Yep.
to be the only ones that impact it." No, our whole organization needs to succeed and needs to do things differently. And so you're spot on. It has to be at that very strategic level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the other question I have, again, we could keep going on this for quite a while, but one other one that comes to mind is, so and I think this might be an adoption question, gets to the
Hmm.
adoption piece for organizations that are looking at doing this. Because a large majority of the workforce may not be familiar with coaching or may not even
Hmm.
be familiar with this capability, there can be some adoption challenges that you may run into because they may not even know what they're being offered and
Hmm.
understand the value. So, how do you help organizations as they move into this so that it doesn't just feel like another
Yeah.
flavor of the week, or,
Right.
oh, we're rolling out this new platform and people go, yeah, what,
Exactly.
whatever, I don't really
Hmm.
care. How do you help organizations through that transition, or tips to do it well?
Yeah. Well, so this is kind of part and parcel of how we work with our partners because that is such
Okay.
an important aspect of it. And one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is we make it super easy for our partners because the
Okay.
beauty of BetterUp is that it is easy for you as an organizational owner of these initiatives because we take care of a lot of that for you. But
Okay.
it starts with partnering with you on what is that change management, what is the communication, and again, we do a lot of that heavy lifting and help you make that right message stick within the organization. But it does start with connecting it to something that matters to the organization and to the individuals within the organization, right? But
Okay.
you're spot on is the message has to be right. It has to be targeted for the individuals and they have to see why this matters to them. But
Okay.
then I will tell you this, Christopher, once they get in, it's not a problem for them to keep using it.
Then it's not okay. So once they're there, it's fine. Well, and I think this goes
Yeah.
back to helping people understand, or just think through the fact that sometimes we have a tendency to think like, what's the thing that we just go and we sign on the dotted line, and the change happens. And the reality
Yeah.
is it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so to your point, I think it's important that while there's tremendous value in this,
Yeah.
you got to know that you're walking into, well, and again, we're not talking about just a program, some little program
Yeah.
you're rolling out. We're talking about an enterprise
Yeah.
transformation. And enterprise transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without a lot of work going into it to help people
Mm-hmm.
understand, what are we doing? Why does
Yeah.
this matter? How does this connect to the bigger vision and goals? So I think that's
Exactly.
that's an important piece to think through.
Yeah. Absolutely. 100%.
Okay. Well, I've got probably more questions than we will have for the remaining 3 minutes that we have. So I'm gonna actually wrap it here, because I think
Okay.
we were able to really unpack some really important things, and I think it's fascinating where you're spending your time as an organization. I think driving this message home of the importance of looking at your workforce holistically, and in the
Mm-hmm.
post leading up to it, I said holistic development,
Yeah.
not just what they want to do. So I think it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing. For people who are interested, hopefully you got something helpful out of the discussion. If you haven't been thinking about development this way, hopefully it's changed your thinking,
Yeah.
and not just on a squishy standpoint, but the hard data behind it. So Maya, I really appreciate you being here. Thanks everybody for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Christopher.